Coming up, the New York Football Giants will return from Germany, losers, falling to the Carolina Panthers in what feels like rock bottom for the franchise. We dive in on the game, the overarching questions about this organization, and whether or not Daniel Jones will land on the bench. Yes, my friends. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where we are your hosts over here. Adam Arbrecht over there, Andrew Makowitz. We're healthy, wealthy, wise, and we're coming off a weekend in which nothing ruins your Sunday morning faster than the New York Football Giants playing in exactly the type of game that Andy said he did not want to see this team perform in. 20-17, they lose in Germany. We'll get into all of it as far as the fallout from it and what it maybe means for the remainder of this season, Andy. But just a sweet little chef's kiss of a Sunday morning.
I mean, you're the standalone game. I consider it a primetime game when you're the only game in town. Everyone is waking up having breakfast. And I think what was going through my mind is the Giants should win this game. They should, right? In the back of my mind, I'm thinking they should. And then I watch the game and I'm thinking back to myself 4 hours earlier, and I'm like, why do I ever think the Giants should beat any team in the NFL? Right? That is the takeaway that you have is whether or not they're favored, whether they're underdogs, whether on the home or the road, the New York Giants, as currently constructed, should not have an expectation that they are going to win another football game this year.
No, I mean, listen, this is, we talk about now, everyone knows going for the tank and whatever you think. We'll talk about quarterbacks as we work our way through the season and get down towards the offseason. But ultimately, this really, to me, ties back to the idea of John Mara giving the vote of confidence and saying, hey, like, I believe in the plan. We want to see it out. No changes are getting made. And I'm sure even when you went and looked at the Giants' schedule, you said, hey, listen, there'll be a lot of losing here maybe down the stretch. That's all right. We'll have a high draft pick and we'll continue to move forward. But you probably circled this one and said, well, what I'd like to do, though, is go over and beat what is perceived to be the worst franchise in the league, what is perceived to be a team that needs to move on from their recent draft pick at quarterback, unless he throws 15 to 25 for 126 yards, 5-yard per pass play average for one Bryce Young, and ends up throwing a touchdown, no interceptions, has a 58.5 QBR, and leads the Panthers over the Giants 20-17. It helps in Tankathon. It helps get you close to the top of the board. But I do really wonder the ramifications of it's not just this game, but if this is the start of the rest of this season where you and I have gone back and forth before, where are we if this is a 3-win team at the end of the year? How can you have confidence in Brian Daboll and the coaching staff at a minimum and then up the chain to Joe Schoen?
Yeah, I mean, Adam, the way that I think about this is it's a couple parts, and I think we're doing it correctly in terms of like, we'll get to Daniel Jones, we'll talk about how bad the team is. But when I watched that game, the one thing that I came away with is while the quarterback is bad, and we will get to all of that stuff, the rest of the team looked undisciplined. The coaching staff looked like they were coaching for different players and personnel than they have on their roster. There was undisciplined penalties on special teams. There were missed field goals. There was bizarre go for it, not go for it on fourth down, like in games where you're trailing or you have momentum. To me, it just felt like I don't know what was going on with Joe Schoen. I mean, Brian Daboll, and team. But to me, that was my biggest takeaway was the quarterback play held them back. With better quarterback play, they may have won this game. But across the board, like when you don't have that quarterback play, it shines a light on all of the other issues that the Giants have. That let's be very clear. They are not just a quarterback away from competing in the division right now as currently constructed. They probably have to turn over 25% of this roster on top of maybe changing out the quarterback to even think that you're going to be in the same category as Washington and Philadelphia and others.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it's not because it's not playing the same old song when it comes to Daniel Jones. His play was terrible, and we will talk about those key moments, which have always been the bugaboo of his career. In those key moments, the lack of decision making as opposed to doing things that you see other elite quarterbacks do. But it's also 28 carries for 153 yards for Chuba Hubbard. This team has been bad against the run all year long. And this is the new construction under the new defensive coordinator, your crown jewel in the middle of it of Dexter Lawrence, but it doesn't seem to be enough. And this goes back to our preseason discussion about, listen, when you got speed and you get after the quarterback, it's all great. Thibodeau's out right now. Azeez Ojulari's been filling in. You have Brian Burns, and he makes some plays. Everybody makes some plays. You can go through an entire game and go, oh, good play over here from that guy. Oh, that was a really nice job penetrating there. But then you turn around and you look at this key box score, because when I said that you had Bryce Young only throwing for 126 yards, you would think, well, then how could the Giants possibly lose this game? Because time and tempo was getting dictated all game long through the running attack. And that's been something that's been a problem all year. So it does, just to your point, highlight that this isn't just, again, these games, could you say, let's get into a shootout as opposed to, a ground and pound? Sure. But still other issues. And you are not a team that ends up winning 3 or 4 games in a year if it's just because your quarterback is the 25th best in the league versus the 12th. I don't think. So it's a frustrating weekend nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the Giants, we'll talk about where they stack rank in terms of other teams in futility. But I mean, even with better quarterback play, I think this team would have 1 or 2 more wins. They're still a 500 team. They're not a 7-2 dominant team when we change one player out. And Adam, you said it before, they can't stop the run. 8 plays, 90 yards. The Carolina Panthers marched down the field, ground and pound on the Giants, and they said, you can't stop us. It's kind of almost the way that I thought that it looked like Carolina had the same approach that I thought the Giants should have had against the Cowboys in the first game where the Giants played the Cowboys, where you're like, run it down their throat. We obviously have a really good running back. Let's control time of possession. Let's not have our quarterback, who is mistake prone, make mistakes. It feels like Dave Canales and the Carolina Panthers, while they are limited in terms of talent, they at least looked around and said, this is our best chance to win. The Giants can't stop the run. We have a good running back. Let's make Bryce Young throw it occasionally when we need it, but let's not have him drop back 40 times in the game and expose all the things that we're worried about, unlike what the Giants did against the Cowboys, where they came out and passed the ball like 6 times to start the game. And even in this game, where it felt like Tyrone Tracy was running the ball all over the place, and Chuba Hubbard still had more rushing attempts than Tyrone Tracy did. To me, it just feels like, was I watching a different team play? Was I seeing something different than Brian Daboll was? I'm sure you felt the same way as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's, you have 37 pass attempts for Daniel Jones, and, you watch a game like this and you think, boy, these quarterbacks are, trying to navigate their way through a difficult game. Year 6 for Daniel Jones, year 2 for Bryce Young, who's been benched, and, all the questions that come along with that. We've done this throughout the season, where sometimes you go, well, let's compare the quarterbacks. One of them, who's been playing for over half a decade in the NFL, looks strikingly similar to a player in his first or second year, or looks like he's being grotesquely outplayed by a rookie quarterback across the field from him. So those things come up. You do mention Tyrone Tracy Jr., 18 carries, 103, continues to look like a very strong player, but had the fumble that went out of bounds, then had the fumble that actually ended the game as they got that kickoff there. Quick fumble, overtime, immediately takes away the possession guarantee for each team. Then it's just a field goal, and the game is effectively over. So that one moment happens too. And I think that maybe even just falls into that bucket as well, right? Like, yeah, bad teams make mistakes. Even players that you're excited about, even players that are performing well for you, are going to have the occasional mistake. And unfortunately, inopportune time, dealing maybe with a shoulder or arm injury in the second half of that game. And I just wondered if maybe that was it. Not making excuses, just trying to play through it. You need some of your best bodies out there, and he makes the ultimate mistake there in overtime.
Yeah, Adam, that was a difficult one because Tyrone Tracy was such a bright spot for the Giants. He was flashing all over the place. Like, we know there's no need to compare him to Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley is a great player in his own right, but the Giants look like they found a diamond in the rough, a late round draft pick. These are the types of things that Joe Shane needs to hit on to be able to point back to John Mara and say, we're building something. We have a good talent evaluation process. To me, Tyrone Tracy was excellent in this game. Another small shout out is, I think Evan Neal played well. You didn't hear his name constantly being talked about on the telecast. He was better in run blocking than he was in pass blocking, Adam. But overall, like, if that's the type of play you can get from Evan Neal, you're like, at least we sign up for that, because that, whatever that was, is better than what we've seen from Azudu, from Hubbard, and even as recently as last year with Evan Neal.
No, for sure. And then that brings up the other questions about decision making and who's starting where and how you should shift your line and whether or not you have a pulse of your roster and your team in terms of when the right time is to make the right decisions around the offensive line. We remind you guys that this episode is brought to you by Personam. It's an AI driven threat detection engine that can give you insights into your network security that other platforms simply can't do. And you can check it all out for yourself over on Personam.ai. That's PERSONAM.com. Check out Personam today. Let's come back in and talk about the higher level, the above the field and beyond the play. Where does this organization stand as we work our way towards the back half of the season? All right, Andy. So we were starting to mention it there about Evan Neal, right? Which then you come back to the higher level and you say, so what was the plan here? You go out in the offseason, you sign the guys, you like them, fantastic. But then you have Illuminor, who we like, who has played well this season. Supposed to probably be a guard, then they move him to tackle. He's playing well at tackle. If the case is that Illuminor was like, boy, I'd really prefer not to swing over to left tackle, and the organization, the coaching staff said, okay, if you don't want to do that, then we're going to try multiple other things that we don't think are the best version of this team, whether it's exposing a zoo to a tackle, whether it's going out and signing a veteran practice squad 33-year-old player. Finally, they make the switch here. Maybe the last few weeks mattered for Evan Neal, right? And I was indifferent to this, but the one caveat, because you pushed for find out what you have in Evan Neal. And I was like, well, obviously they know what they have because they're not playing him. He can't get over top of Joshua Zudu. They're signing veterans instead of playing Evan Neal. And then he plays, and it's only the Carolina Panthers. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. But you're like, well, it wasn't horrific. So now I come back to what are we doing organizationally? This is your draft pick, and you seemingly put a lot of effort into keeping him away from the football field.
It's funny, Adam, because as I'm watching Evan Neal like plow over people in the run game, and I see him like not being a turnstile on every single play, I went back to our conversation where it's like when Andrew Thomas went down, you're like, here's what I think the organization will do, and you laid out exactly what you thought they would do, and then I came in and said, here's what they need to do. Like they need to figure out whether or not they have Evan Neal. And the funny thing is, you see all the beat writers got the same text message or the same message from the organization on like Thursday or Friday. They're like, oh, this has been in the works for a couple of weeks. This has always been the plan, is to get him up to speed. It is delusions of grandeur, Adam, because if they think that this was the plan all along, to have other people look absolutely horrific when this was what they should have done from the onset, get Evan Neal ready to play. Make sure that he can get out there. You have all of, he was injured in training camp, but you have all the ways to be able to coach him up, figure out what he needs. To me, it was almost an indictment on the organization, the fact that Evan Neal looked better than both Joshua Zudu and Hubbard, because they've had him sitting there the whole time. At least try this, because as I said before, he seems to have the most upside rather than pulling guys off of practice squads that are 34 years old that give up the most pressures of any tackle in the entire NFL.
So I'll stop short of saying that, they should have been doing this 4 weeks ago or whatever it was, only because you did mention the one thing that Evan Neal was injured in training camp, new offensive line coach. So you're not out there to get the reps. You're not out there to play in preseason games, right? So I'll camp it a little, I'll couch it a little bit in that of like, hey, maybe your timeline was your timeline. And I think about this with like, sometimes it's baseball usually, well, he's going to be down. I mean, he's not going to play. This is a scheduled rest day. Maybe they just came into the season and said, like, we're not going to touch him until point X. And they brought up, well, what if we have an injury? Doesn't matter. We're not going to touch him. Now we can fundamentally disagree with whether that should have been the approach, but like, hey, he's going to keep developing on the side. And then when the time comes, we'll find out. Now, on a high level, if he continues to play and he looks decent or respectable, I think we're going to get good sample sizes coming up here with some of the teams on the schedule. Hey, maybe the Giants, reclamate a little bit of value out of their first round pick and he's able to stick around on this roster. But oh, by the way, all those same issues come up with when you drafted him and when the next contract and 5th-year options. And wouldn't you know it, that brings us up to the highest level, to GM, to head coach, and trying to look at this and say, well, where are we? Because the one thing I'll note that you mentioned about the media, and I don't mean this negatively towards them, but usually beat reporters can be a bit of a window into where the wind is blowing. And their wind has all shifted dramatically over the last 6 to 8 days to where the way that they're talking about Brian Dable and the way they talk about in-game decisions and key moments, all of a sudden it has an inflection and a tone of like, now here's a guy that's not going to be around. Whereas everything leading up to that was like, we got to be on the same team here. We got to be in the media room with you. This feels more like maybe there's a sense that things are going the wrong way for Dable as well.
Adam, I was thinking the same thing. And the perfect microcosm is the flea flicker play around midfield when it's 3rd and 2. And you see the criticism that's being levied at Brian Dable. And it's a perfect microcosm of the season in general, the coaching, the performance of Daniel Jones. Doesn't it really sum it all up? Like the way I think about it is you cannot make that play call in that situation with the personnel that you have.
With Daniel Jones as your quarterback.
Yeah, correct. It is a
they
genius
peel back
play
and they
call.
show the wide open receivers over the middle of the field, and you're like, baby boy, it's all there for you.
Right. So like
Jones cannot
the
throw
play
a football
call
without first pumping.
The play call was a very intelligent play call. It created people to be open. But the reason you can't call that play is the limitations of Daniel Jones knowing that he holds the ball too long and may actually take a sack. The only thing you can't do in that situation is a sack or a turnover. Daniel Jones could have done either of those as he's standing there with deer in headlights motion. Adam, it's just a perfect microcosm because it's a great play call. And then you're like, well, if he had his quarterback or someone better than Daniel Jones, and then we go back into the referendum of, well, Joe Shane and Brian Dable signed up for this quarterback. They've had an opportunity to make changes to Drew Lock or Tommy DeVito. They have not done that. So to me, it was a perfect encapsulation of the quarterback is holding us back. They're not making any changes. They've kind of co-signed this whole thing. And that's leading to all of these frustrating airmail balls and missed opportunities for the offense.
Nice little sideline pass that he didn't get when he had time in the pocket to Malik Neighbors. Everyone appreciated that one. Philosophical question we could talk about throughout the week probably is Brian Dable playing chess, not checkers, when it comes to like, I'm going to expose the organization. I'm going to expose John Mara to the reality of what Daniel Jones is and what he is not. Here's a great opportunity. I designed a brilliant play call. The wide receivers have been schemed open, and he cannot get the ball to them. This is why he's holding us back, not everything else, whether or not we agree or disagree, right? Now, don't respond to that because we have a more important question to get to here. We'll talk about Brian Dable throughout the week. Is Daniel Jones done as the starter? Because now that's the next thing. Oh, he should be benched, and you got to go in. You got to play Tommy. You got to play Drew. This would, again, be interesting to me because we know what happened last year. You had a little bit of Tyrod Taylor, then Tommy DeVito. You won some football games. You messed up your draft odds. Are we in for deja vu around that, where now Brian Dable again has to turn into, well, let me just show you the team can do it. We can win football games. I'll show you with this, random third string backup we have here, or Drew Lock, depending. And then you'll go ahead and say, oh, right, it's still just this one area, not maybe an overall sense that we need to improve.
Well, so Adam, obviously last year was a little different because Daniel Jones had the knee injury, wasn't even able to play. So they had no other options other than Tyrod Taylor and Tommy DeVito. They're in the unique situation where Daniel Jones is healthy, but he's just playing very, very bad football. So you bring up a good point, and it's kind of what does the organization prioritize more? Do they prioritize having a top pick, a top 1, 2, or 3 pick in the NFL draft?
Like an overall, and
prioritize, or do they? Yeah, exactly. They're the number 2 pick as it sits today. Or do they prioritize making sure that Daniel Jones does not get hurt for the guaranteed money that is on his contract? Because you can't, like, which one of those is more of a priority? Because if the priority is get him off the books, let's save that $18 to $23 million of Daniel Jones, he has to sit after this bye week. There's no question in my mind. But to your point, it does open up the idea of like, well, if someone else plays a little bit better in this system, then you're only hurting your own draft pick. But the Giants cannot risk that $20 million being on their cap next season. You have to bench Daniel Jones. You have 2 weeks to be able to bring up whoever, whether it's Drew Lock or Tommy DeVito, and that's got to be your quarterback moving forward. I think we've seen the last, barring injury or anything crazy, I think we've seen the last snap of Daniel Jones as a starting quarterback of the New York Giants.
It probably is the case. I just don't know. Like, this is always the classic, like, well, yeah, now you have to because you don't want the injury risk. Well, I'm like, well, the last 2 weeks were injury risks too. And the week before that was an injury risk, right? And when he's bowling people over against Pittsburgh, it's an injury risk. Like, so So that
Well,
mentality is weird to me. Now, again, under the guise of, well, if we win these football games, then you're competitive. And Daniel Jones gives us the best chance to win football games. And that's why I remain a starter. Like, I get the merry-go-round of logic that gets used around these things. But it just feels like if you were that concerned about it, you would have, 3 weeks ago said, no, thank you. Now, maybe it's based on performances and he has some good games and it's hard to justify, right? Sitting him down. But the bottom line is you've been losing. So listen, end of the day, if this is what now you're at that point and you're going to sit Daniel Jones down specifically because you don't want the injury risk, that's going to be interesting. Daniel Jones will say all the right stuff in the media. He typically does, but you're going to have a problem here. You already had a bit of a problem when they got rid of Nick McLeod. The way that the locker room kind of reacted to that weren't a fan of that move over a spiteful $1.51 million savings. Like, there's a lot of things going on organizationally right now that just feels like it's all tumbling in the wrong direction. So allow Drew Lock or Tommy DeVito to step in here. The best version of it is they showcase the full function of an offensive system for a drive or two while the Giants continue to lose football games and give themselves the options to do whatever they want come next draft.
yeah, at the end of the day, Adam, it's
Mm.
losses like the one against the Carolina Panthers in primetime that change John Mara giving a vote of confidence to all of a sudden being like, we were trying
All
to
right,
win that football
gladiator.
game and things did not look good and we did not look good across the board. It
Of course.
starts opening up more questions about the coaching staff, to your point. And we can go into the whole idea of do they deserve to be around? Are they the direction that the Giants should head? What are the alternatives if you didn't have Brian Dable or Joe Shane here? To me, it was just a horrible game. It ruined every single person's Sunday morning. I don't know why I expected more from this team. I expected more from Daniel Jones. They're going against the 32nd ranked defense in the NFL. They're giving up over
Yeah.
32 points a game. The offense couldn't move the ball down the field successfully. It was painful to watch that game and realize that the New York Giants might be the worst team in the NFL.
Oh, they're the worst team in the NFL for sure, I think. And listen, I haven't watched New England Patriots game, so who knows? But just to crystallize, the Carolina Panthers averaged 16 points per game. They scored 20 overtime, and they give up 32 points a game. And the Giants put up 17. And this isn't anything new. We're not breaking news here. The Giants offense has struggled mightily. Yes, Daniel Jones has been a disaster, but when mistakes can get made, this team tends to make them. So they go down. They get to the second overall rankings behind only Jacksonville, as we all knew would be there. Probably a conversation about what that looks like this offseason as well. We will talk about Brian Dable's job security, maybe talk about what are the other options that the Giants should look at if they're going to move on, and would it be a clean sweep with Joe Shane going out the door as well? All that, plus football, but there's a bye week coming up for the Giants. So guess what? Can't lose. I'll tell you one thing. Bye week, you can never lose, baby. You get us over on YouTube, you get us on the podcast feed. And until next time, until the best times, Andrew Mackowitz would want, need, and demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.